of course, watching India. But in our hearts and our minds, we all know that the world is also watching our entire region. And what better topic than the topic of enduring peace in South Asia? And I don't think anybody better than Ambassador Parthasarathy to lead this particular discussion. So please could you give a very warm welcome to Ambassador Parthasarathy.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. And before I welcome the guests, may I welcome you all. I'm glad in the course of the introduction, he had mentioned that one has been a distinguished diplomat. Normally after we retire, we consider ourselves as an extinguished diplomat because we move on to other things in life. So may I start first by welcoming a very honored guest, Jigme Thinley. Jigme Thinley, of course, needs no introduction, but I think one secret I should reveal, which is not there in the data. He has coined a term for his country, which has led it to becoming the most advanced country in South Asia. Bhutan will be the first developed country in South Asia. And he doesn't welcome him, look at it, his country in terms of gross national income. He set, with the guidance of the king, an objective of gross national happiness. So when we talk of South Asia, he'll have much to say. Next, may I invite Prasad Karyavasam, His Excellency. And Prasad needs no introduction. He is more Indian, and in his knowledge of Indian politics far exceeds that of this entire room put together. He's been one of Sri Lanka's most accomplished diplomats in this country and done a great job. And finally, may I invite Mr. Lobsang Sangay, a very distinguished guest of ours. Lobsang has the qualifications which many of us won't have, apart from being a very distinguished leader of the Tibetan community living outside Tibet. He has law degrees both from India and from Harvard, and has very sort of successfully articulated the cause. Now, may I also welcome the former Prime Minister of Jordan, who's here at this moment. We are grateful for present here, sir. Now, coming to the subject itself, we're talking of peace and security in South Asia. What is South Asia? I would call it an artificial sort of creation, but nevertheless, geographically, the area living within the boundaries of the Himalayas and the Karakoram Mountains to the east and to the Pamir mountain range to the west. Strategically speaking, that is how you define South Asia. India is at the center of South Asia. India has borders with all the countries of South Asia. None of the South Asian countries have borders with each other. And therefore, India, in a way, despite size, becomes central to South Asia. A few thoughts, and then I'll pass it on. I've given you the broad strategic perspective, but the northern Indian plains, just bear in mind, have always faced invasions from the west. There have never been invasions from the east, historically, starting from the days of Alexander the Great and the Greeks. That has been a continuing feature of history. I come from a part of the country where the Vindhya mountains happily protected us from this. So, to the Indian audience, I would say we have remained authentically what we were over the centuries south of the Vindhyas. In today's world, what we are looking at is what the world is looking at, economic integration. South Asia is moving in that direction. Towards our west, according to the Americans, according to the world, is strategically the most dangerous region in the world in the face of global terrorism. But despite this, we are looking for a greater economic integration so that we deal with differences of the past, of history, by looking towards a greater and better and more prosperous future. But all the representatives here today are all from countries to our east. The great thing of our countries to the east is we share a common heritage of Buddhism and of language, of history, and we've never invaded each other. So this is something remarkable of our Eastern history. And perhaps it's, at the concluding remarks, one can go into this in greater detail about how we have not, in India, made use of this spiritual heritage of ours. After all we have welcomed every religion in the world. The Semitic religions, Judaism, Islam, Christianity and then Islam, came by the trade winds to the coasts, west coast of India. Buddhism, the Indic religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism and Sikhism grew in our land with large expatriate communities. It has been an immense spiritual heritage which we have yet to use to our advantage. Thank you so much. And Jigme Thinle, I told him my first visit to his country was to his birthplace. And so I think we do have a personal bond of sorts. Jigme Thinle.
Namaskar. I am indeed most honored to be invited to this very important event amid such gracious hospitality. Thank you, India Foundation. I shall speak on the dimension of the vast subject of enduring peace in the region, peace and cooperation among the South Asian nations. I have written down my brief remarks so as not to cross the time limit that I have been allotted. South Asia's is the unenviable narrative of endless violence, insurgency, separatist movements, and even wars. It is indeed, as Ambassador Parthasarthi just remarked, a dangerous place. Ours is a region where successive governments have failed to fulfill the very basic responsibility of providing peace. Ours is also the irony of a region that attained freedom from foreign domination through the powers of non-violence, or the power of non-violence, and yet unable to live without violence among ourselves. Given such a background, what I'm about to say may border the ideal, the unrealistic. But the pursuit of what appears to be realistic is not enough for South Asia. And as the duty of leaders who we expect to inform through this dialogue is to take our region and its people beyond the realm of what we have grown too comfortable in accepting as normal, I'm going to share my dream of what we must strive for with daring. As a South Asian citizen, I have welcomed the air of optimism that Prime Minister Modi and his government have brought to India and to the region, and no less to a world that looks hopefully to India in these difficult times. And it is this sense of optimism, strengthened by the actions taken by his government on all fronts, including international, that emboldens me to speak my mind. I see three preconditions that must be accepted by all nations of South Asia for enduring peace and cooperation among themselves. First is accepting the reality of our geography. The Hindu Kush Himalayan ranges and the Indian Ocean bind us together as a region and offer us the good fortune of interdependence. The sad thing is, we acknowledge this, but are afraid to become dependent on each other, particularly on our largest neighbor, India. This arises mainly from the fear, doubt, and suspicion of the smaller countries having to compromise their sovereignty. It is an obsession to which India may perhaps not have been sensitive enough. And the fuel for such feelings are plenty, both within nations and outside our region. It is therefore not surprising that whereas interdependence should give rise to cooperation, we have hostilities that find expression in various forms. Now, sovereignty, I believe, is not a sacred relic to be preserved at the cost of national progress and well-being. It is a precious value that finds meaning and will flourish when it serves as a means to strengthen freedom, to gain peace, progress, and well-being. Sovereignty and independence otherwise have no purpose. If even the tiniest countries have become more secure and strong amid peace and prosperity in the European Union, then why can't the same be true here in South Asia? Second is accepting the reality of India as being central to peace and prosperity in South Asia, and for this reason, appreciating the inevitability of India's leadership role in the region. In this regard, the natural configuration of the South Asian constellation is compelling. Firstly, located right in the center, as Ambassador Parthasarathy remarked, and it is worth repeating, India is disproportionately the largest in more ways than one. India is the only country, as he said, contiguous by land or sea to all other countries except Afghanistan. And as a result, the notion of South Asia as a region and regard for each other as neighbors is because all share the commonality of being India's neighbors. The only nation that is directly affected by events in all the countries, if only in parts, is again India. Likewise, India is the only country whose internal conditions and developments directly affect the well-being of all South Asian nations. She is also the country that has the most to offer to all others. And India is the only country that shares cultural, racial, and historical connections and commonalities with all nations of the region. In so saying, I do not suggest that for India, good relations with her neighbors matter less. On the contrary, large nations become great only when they enjoy good relations with their smaller neighbors. This is ever so true, especially in the 21st century. It is not enough that India is on the path of growth and prosperity and is poised to possibly become the fastest growing economy in the world. Bangladesh and Sri Lanka are not doing too badly either on their own. The point I make is so much more can be achieved in an atmosphere of peace without fear of conflict and through cooperation. Besides, there are now other interests beyond national and regional prosperity which India must consider. India is no longer the poor third world country trying hard to make herself relevant on the global stage. India of today matters and will matter even more. No world stage seems complete now without Prime Minister Modi on it. As a world economic and military power, I don't regard India as an emerging economic power. It is an economic power. And representing 1/6 of humanity, this great nation has the right and responsibility of global leadership in our increasingly troubled world. This requires moral legitimacy and authority, which, among others, must come from the support and goodwill of her immediate neighbors. And certainly, India's stature and clout will be that much greater if besides being a great nation, she carries the weight of an entire region. The third reality that must be accepted is regional integration as not only a choice, but as necessary in this competitive world. I believe it is only when the countries of South Asia go beyond the stage of sharing common aspirations to actually come together to become a truly integrated region of sovereign and equal nations that we will experience enduring peace in South Asia. I have always stood for full economic integration of the region through a well-regulated common market facilitated by a monetary union and efficient connectivity, wherein quality, access, and delivery of minimum social services are standardized. Taking inspiration from the European Union, it is not unthinkable to imagine a South Asian Commonwealth where those with more take on the moral responsibility to help the ones with less to maintain equitable quality of life in the region. India is already doing this, and Bhutan is deeply grateful at the bilateral level. But doing so under the SAARC or regional auspices might serve the higher purpose of building greater confidence and purpose in regional integration. I will go so far as to even suggest a shared regional security arrangement. The threats to be considered in this regard should not be just military or external, but include, more importantly, the natural and man-made calamities that are increasing in frequency and magnitude all over the world. If we were able to achieve this, even on a modest scale to begin with, we will build greater confidence and trust among our security establishments while enhancing cooperation, resilience, and preparedness to protect our people against the rising incidents of disasters. As long as we are unwilling or unable to share perceptions or subscribe to a common understanding in this vital area of security, misunderstandings will continue and mischief-making by various elements, internal and external, will not abate. What makes this particularly urgent and worth pursuing against all odds, as it may be, is that we have two countries in our region that are nuclear armed, with another nuclear power as our regional neighbor. Again, I repeat, these are dreams. But then, if we do not pursue what is ideal in a world where imagination is our only limit to what man can achieve, then South Asia will continue to be a region where peace will remain elusive. We must not allow our prevailing bilateral issues to cloud our vision for a future of enduring peace. We must not allow these to daunt us and limit our aspirations and endeavors for peace. Lastly, as our region and people prosper, albeit with great inequities, we are at risk of forgetting what gives us contentment and happiness. We are in danger of losing our humanity as we compete and strive to earn more, to consume and waste more of the less we need. As relationships become less sincere and as families and communities crumble amid erosion of values and spirituality. Peace, in the end, has to do with the peace of mind, the basic condition for happiness that comes from being able to balance our material needs with those of the spiritual, balance the needs of the body with those of the mind. Thank you, Dhanyabad.
Tebowan, Vanakkam. Distinguished fellow panelists and distinguished guests, I'm so happy to join all of you, and I want to thank India Foundation for giving me this opportunity to join you today. I feel like I have come home, and this topic that we are discussing today is a very important topic for our region. I have been a diplomat for Sri Lankan Foreign Service diplomat for last 34 years, and I'm still is. Therefore, I don't have the luxury of Ambassador Parasarathi to be very open. Therefore, my comments will be mine, not the government. So these are my comments, and it's my personal views that I'm going to express. I have written it down so that I'm precise on what I say. And these are my thoughts of having served in this country twice. I was Deputy High Commissioner in Delhi from 95 to 98. Until recently, 4.5 years, I was the High Commissioner. And some of you in the audience, I know you all very well, and so happy to see you. And some of my comments may compliment Honorable Tinley. I think he led this discussion admirably, but I will focus on another side of the issue. Although the geographic area that is politically described as South Asia in modern times consists 8 sovereign and independent nations, the people of this region are heirs to an interconnected ancient civilizations. Arising out of this connectivity, our links are far deeper than we may perceive. Our cultures are interdependent with deeply common elements. They have survived power struggles among kingdoms and regional leaders in the past and transcended long years of colonial rule. Today, our traditions, languages, music, food, and the arts still remain vibrant and alive, and their commonalities continue to unite our people despite the boundaries and borders that define us as sovereign nations. We have this common civilizational continuum that constitutes a historical basis for sustaining harmonious relations among the people of the region. And the practical reality of modern times are that our destinies are intertwined. None of us South Asian nations can reach fullest potential with security and stability and achieve social economic progress for people in isolation. Therefore, peace among and within nations in South Asia is an essential factor for individual growth within countries, as well as for the collective progress and prosperity of people of the region. Unfortunately, despite thousands of years of wisdom that we are heirs to, and the modern day advancement in science and technology, which we can together harness for our common benefit, the region remains hostage to colonially inherited preoccupation of what divides us: ethnicity, religion, language, rather than what unites us. As a result, we have fallen prey to the various obstacles that have been created or due to historical events, and we have succumbed to attempts by external parties to divide us further. Many theorists and international relations experts, both within and outside the region, tend to look at the prospects for peace and prosperity and cooperation within the region in pessimistic terms. Of course, statistics show that region is one of the least integrated in the world, both within itself and with the rest of the world. It is a region that is beset with political and security issues and disputes. It is home to 22% of the world's population, but has only 6% of the world's GDP, and is considered a resource-poor region. Although statistics are important, we must not allow statistics to feed our pessimism. Our historic narrative tells a different story, and we must draw inspiration from that narrative to draw on our strengths and turn down the arguments of naysayers and doomsday predictors. We have the markets and the demand that is required to keep growing. We have a rich history and commonalities. our region enjoyed a substantive share of world GDP several centuries ago. Despite the bleak picture that has predicted as the region's future several decades ago, it cannot be denied that the region has revived and undergone unimagined transformation of its economy, society, and polity within last few decades. All our countries are now democracies. We must focus our attention on these positive aspects to work on what unites us and what is in our people's best and greater interests. It is true that South Asia has more than its share of insurgencies, radicalism, terrorism, and extremism. Our region, as a result of this and conventional security issues, has substantially high defense expenditure. However, the realization that a peaceful environment is essential to work on what really matters for each of our nations and the region as a whole does exist, except among few groups and individuals in the region who benefit from instability. It is widely acknowledged that it is impossible to provide security and prosperity to the people of the region without culture of peace. Unfortunately, despite advancement in the economic front and improvement in the security situation in some parts of South Asia within last 5-6 years, including in my own country, which succeeded in eliminating terrorism, the region is still beset with very serious security concerns. The capacity of state structures and their ability to deal with terrorism and extremism requires attention. And this is even more urgent today in the face of increasing radicalization and extremism within and outside the region and the influence and possible devastating impact of this phenomena on our societies. Cooperation in this aspect as a region is imperative, yet we seem to lag behind in this vital requirement for securing peace within the region. Urgent attention must be given to putting in place institutions and systems to address security challenges in our region. Countries must move away from zero-sum thinking in political and security issues and begin to think and act more in terms of people-centric, collective regional security. Cooperative security framework must be considered. The threat of terrorism, ethnic and religious extremism, as well as maritime and cyber security require cooperative solutions. These are not issues that can be dealt with in isolation. The region as a whole should reject sectarian politics and ethnic nationalism, given region's multitude of ethnic groups. The question arises as to how we should chart our way forward. Ideally, our economic and political security issues should be addressed simultaneously in view of the urgency of these matters for the stability of our region as a whole. However, we must recognize that political and security issues, given their complexity in the context of our region, some of it was mentioned by Prime Minister Tingley, former Prime Minister Tingley, require to be handled with utmost care and with wisdom. Dealing with economic issues more rapidly and in an accelerated fashion and building upon our age-old commonalities with vigor would be a prudent way to build the confidence required for dealing with security political issues. People-to-people contact, connectivity including energy and grid connectivity, tourism, trade, economic links, I believe will help us build confidence. It will also create the necessary interdependence which would compel our region to transcend political boundaries both within and between countries and to work together for common good. Prime Minister Modi's unparalleled gesture of inviting the region's leaders to his inauguration was an innovative and important step. In his address at the SAARC summit in Kathmandu last month, Prime Minister Modi stated that the region should move forward with all SAARC members if possible, or some of them if necessary. He said, and I quote, "The bonds will grow through SAARC or outside it. among us all or some of us, unquote. This approach by India to work on areas where there can be forward movement instead of adopting a wait and watch approach until everyone comes on board is heartening. The decision to proceed with trans-border road and rail links, electricity grids, and tourist circuits is an important one for the region as a whole. I want to give you some personal experience. A remarkable phenomena that I have observed in South Asia is the tradition that existed in some parts and which still exists in most parts, including in my own country, of tolerance and understanding of different members of family worshipping different gods of his or her own choice. Each of Buddhist temples in my country have incorporated Hindu gods. Most Buddhists would also go to Christian churches to worship different saints. Hindu kovils, Buddhist temples, churches, and mosques are often located right next to each other peacefully in close proximity in Sri Lanka. Every community joins in each other's traditional celebrations. This inclusive approach to life, which at times in danger in modern times, has been recognized as essential, and efforts are being made in my country for its preservation. Great emperors such as Asoka, Akbar, too adopted such an inclusive approach. Such traditions of South Asia, which are under threat of erosion, must be revived and retained in the interest of stability of our region. In order to instill enduring peace, it is essential that we step back to our roots to seek wisdom and find strength in our ancient value systems that exemplified inclusivity and harmony while incorporating structures of society that are inherently stable. We must recognize that inclusivity is not an alien concept for South Asians, but an age-old tradition. It is not a foreign concept to be embraced new, but a part of our own value system. In today's interdependent world, external influence, threats to stability in the region is a fact of life due to strategic and commercially expedient nature of the globalizing world. Such external interventions have often exacerbated and promoted differences within and among communities and countries across South Asia. External elements often planted seeds of mistrust within and across communities and countries in South Asia. Sometimes, unsuspecting South Asians nurture such seeds, making them grow into trees and bear fruits of ill will within the region and beyond. It is essential that as South Asians, we introspect and look within ourselves for solutions to problems and take necessary measures to ensure security and prosperity for all communities across South Asia. India, by its size and profile, has a responsibility and a capacity to lead in this venture. Cross-border issues remain as a major irritant, even flashpoints arising out of our recent colonial domination of the region. Such issues are complicated and will obviously act as a drag on any effort by South Asian community to move towards an era of peace. In this regard, use of violence and terrorism to settle political and societal differences should not be tolerated. Instead, forums such as SAARC must be better used as platform to usher a new era of security and prosperity based on age-old values and ethical systems of South Asia, coupled with modern system of rule-based governance. Moreover, it is essential to search for processes which facilitates common security and prosperity. For start, like-minded South Asian countries should endeavor to build a security architecture on land and sea that will take into account both aspirations and fears of at least some, if not most, South Asian nations. And this should take into account South Asia's interaction with global and extra-regional powers as well. Such an approach, building a security architecture, among other measures, can include action to declare Indian Ocean as a zone of peace. The South Asian nations that initiate such a security architecture must leave room open for other South Asian nations to join in as and when they are ready and comfortable. Modern democracy, which now thrives in South Asian countries, can be better used as a tool of good governance and to promote the rule of law, both within communities across South Asia and between South Asian nations. It is well established that during 5th century before Christ, the Sakya clan of the northern India, which Buddha belonged to, practiced a form of democracy. Therefore, democracy must not be looked upon at all as an alien concept for the region. In conclusion, let me emphasize that enduring peace in South Asia is a dynamic project that has multitude of elements which are essential for it to succeed. The stakeholders of this include all leaders, parliamentarians, academics, scientists, scholars, and all of you, and all of us. All must contribute to reorient our society and our discourse for a culture of enduring peace based on region's ancient wisdom to reap benefits of modern opportunities for security, growth, and prosperity as a region. We must make peacemaking a habit among us to achieve enduring peace in South Asia. Thank you. Dhanyawad.
Thank you to India Foundation for hosting me, not only hosting me, but giving me a platform to be with very distinguished speakers and some people who have achieved a great deal in their life. And as you saw, both of them have the written speech. And as usual, I'm more of an extempore speaker. As they were speaking, I was writing my speech on my iPad, or rather iPhone. So I tried to be bit succinct as much as I could. Perhaps yesterday, the conference started with Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard from America invoking Krishna. Perhaps having spent 16 years in America, I should also invoke Shivaji. I am a Tibetan. I am a Tibetan who has sought refuge in India, but I am from Tibet, who has given refuge to Shivaji. And Kailashnath and Mansarovar are in Tibet. And as the India Ideas Conclave talks about, the geography as well, and you might wonder how did Tibet fit into South Asia, and I will make the argument that it does. Because as Ambassador Parthasarathi made the argument that India is the center of South Asia, and none of the South Asian countries have neighbors with each other. But Tibet is the connecting line. Tibet is neighbor with Bhutan, Tibet is neighbor with Nepal, Tibet is neighbor with India, and also to some extent, Pakistan as well. And with Sri Lanka, perhaps we have common Buddhism as well. So in that sense, Tibet does fit in. Some people might have this idea that Tibet is a peripheral issue, it's a small issue, it's a landlocked, small place. It is not so. Tibet, from geographical point of view, is as big as 2.5 square kilometers of land, which is as big as Western Europe, which is as big as California and Texas combined, which is quite a large portion of South Asia as a whole. Now, I would like to make an argument. Rather, I would like to propose an idea, only one idea. This is India Ideas Conclave. If you buy this idea, the problem of Tibet will be solved. Because for enduring peace in South Asia, I would like to propose Tibet is the key for enduring peace in South Asia. And I have 4 leads to submit the argument. 4 leads are not spelled L-I or L-E-E, it's L-Ys. That's spiritually, geopolitically, historically, and environmentally. Spiritually, because Tibet was a major military empire till 7th and 8th century. It extended its empire all the way to China. In fact, Tibetan military occupied the capital of China, Xi'an, for a month, and in fact, imposed a puppet emperor. And then the Tibetan empire, a military empire, extended all the way to Ganges in India and to Central Asia. It was a major military empire. But then what happened? In 8th and 9th centuries, many Indian scholars were invited to Tibet to preach Buddhism. And so did many Tibetan Buddhist scholars went to Nalanda University and preached Buddhism in Tibet as well. With the influence of Buddhism, pacification of Tibet happened. Now, some of the top Buddhist scholars who came from the subcontinent war, Padmasambhava, whom we also call Guru Rinpoche, he is known to be either a prince of Kashmir or Afghanistan. Nagarjuna was a great scholar in Nalanda University. His teaching is the most influential in the Tibetan Buddhist world, actually happens to be from Andhra Pradesh. Shantideva, another great scholar who I also personally referred to, is reportedly also from Gujarat. Hence, these many Indian Buddhist scholars, all through their works, influenced and brought Buddhism to Tibet, and hence pacification or culture of peace prevailed in Tibet. To the extent that it followed more a Buddhist hermetic policy or an isolationist policy. It kind of disengaged itself from the rest of the world. During the First and Second World War, Tibet was so isolationist in its outlook that it did not provide or allow Americans to provide arms and ammunition to its ally in China, to Chiang Kai-shek. So it remained. Unfortunately, Tibet was caught in this great game with British, Russia, and China trying to dominate the Central Asian countries. And obviously now we know Mongolia is divided into inner and outer Mongolia between Russia and China. And Afghanistan still remains a challenge because British and Russia tried to dominate the country for some time. Unfortunately, Tibet was occupied by China in 1959. Now, for the first time after the occupation of Tibet, what happened was, geopolitically speaking now, India and China, for the first time, faced each other. Before that, the border between India and China was always the border between India and Tibet. Now, with these two giants, the largest populated countries in the whole world, coming face to face, brought enormous geopolitical shift, conflicts, tensions as well. For example, when Simla Convention was signed in 1914, it was signed between Tibet and British India. China was a signatory to the draft of the Simla Convention, but they did not sign the final document. However, on the sideline, the border demarcation was finalized between Tibet and India, and it's called McMahon Line, because the British representative at that time was Sir McMahon, and Tibetan representative was the Tibetan Prime Minister Longchen Shatra. Hence, the border, the present border, the preferred border for India, called McMahon Line, was signed between Tibet and India. So if McMahon Line is the preferred border for South Asia or India, then the signatory to that treaty was Tibet, not China. Now, we all know after that 1962 war between India and China also happened because Tibet was no more geopolitically the buffer zone between India and Tibet. Now, with face-to-face with each other, now we know the 4,000 kilometers long border between India and China, or China and South Asia, and then has become a new reality, and the tension is increasing. As per the media reports, in 2012 and 2013, more than 400 incursions happened from the Chinese side to Indian border areas. Now it's increasing every year. Now there is a major military buildup in whole of Asia, but particularly on China's side as well as India's side. Now China has about 23 regiments on the Chinese side, and India has 11 regiments. China has built 5 major airfields. They're building 1 more, and 30 airports in Tibetan areas. India has 1 airfield and then a couple of airports. So now Chinese have built railway line all the way from China to Lhasa. They've extended it to Shigatse. From Shigatse, the extension will be to the border of India, to Sikkim, Arunachal Pradesh, to some extent. Then it will touch Nepal and Bhutan as well. So hence you can clearly see geopolitics is a major shift. The infrastructure development on the Chinese side is increasing every day. Hence, if geopolitically Tibet seems to be important, then environmentally Tibet is very, very important. Tibet is called the 3rd pole. After Antarctica and Arctic, Tibet has the 3rd highest reserve of ice. And unlike Antarctica and Arctic, the ice or the glaciers of Tibet becomes fresh water. It turns into a river, provides fresh water to rest of South Asia and Southeast Asia and China. For example, the Indus River, the Satluj River, they start from Tibet to Kashmir to Pakistan. Indus River, in fact, the 60% of Indus River is fresh water directly from the glaciers of Tibet. Brahmaputra River, from Tibet to India to Bangladesh. Recently, we learned that China has built 1 dam over Brahmaputra River. They are planning 2 more. And Mekong River and Salween River, they flow from Tibet all the way to Southeast Asia to Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam. Yangtze River, we all have read about the Yangtze dams. Yangtze River starts in Tibet. And Yellow River, the cradle of Chinese civilization, it also starts Tibet. And you can clearly see the importance of Tibet environmentally. The glaciers and the snows of Tibet, when they melt, they become fresh water and provide water to all the neighboring countries. Now, many experts say that before, wars were fought over land. Now, wars are fought over energy. Soon, wars will be fought over water. For example, China has 19% of the world population. But as far as fresh water is concerned, anywhere from 7% to 12% only. And India is worse, so is Bangladesh and other countries. Now, you're looking at 50% of the world population with 40% of the world population, but maybe around 50% without fresh water. And Tibet is the source of fresh water. In addition to fresh water, Tibet also has pristine forest. The Tibetan Plateau helps provide actually rain to whole of South Asia and Southeast Asia. The mist over Bay of Bengal and Indian Ocean, it's attracted towards the Tibetan Plateau because of the sun and because of the height of Tibet. And then when clouds are formed, hits the Tibetan Plateau, one towards this side provides rain for South Asia, one towards this side provides rain to Southeast Asia. Hence, Tibet is crucial as far as monsoon of the continent is concerned. Hence, Tibet's value from environmental point of view is very, very important. So historically, Tibetans acted as the steward or the guardian over the Tibetan Plateau and respected the natural flow of rivers. We never charge for water. Nowadays, water is sold around the world. And hence, we respected the sustainable development over the Tibetan Plateau, and we respected all its neighbors. So Tibet also has lots of minerals, gold, copper, borax, uranium. As per the Chinese government survey, there are 123 different types of minerals in Tibet. The 2nd largest copper mine in China is in Tibet. So you can clearly see the importance of Tibet from environmental point of view. So what could we do to have enduring peace in South Asia? So we must restore Tibet as is the Buddhist civilization. Spiritually, it should be allowed to have cultural peace in Tibet. Geopolitically, it should be allowed to be the buffer zone between China and India. And historically, to have some sense of neutrality so that you can de-escalate the potential tension between two giants. And for that, Tibetans, we have proposed a policy called middle way approach, which is to seek genuine autonomy within China. So this is a win-win proposition even for the Chinese government, so that Chinese government can have the sovereignty and territorial integrity, whereas Tibetans can have Tibet, where we can practice our spirituality, where we can respect our environment, and where we can practice and embrace our neutrality as far as geopolitics is concerned. So this is my single idea, that Tibet is the key to enduring peace in South Asia. Mind you, though, Shivaji is still there, and he's looking down on Shiv Bhakt, whether you will come and restore his historical position or not. If you don't, you have to answer him when you leave this world. If you do, there will be enduring peace in Tibet and South Asia. Thank you.
Mr. Modi obviously has made the fulcrum of his approach in South Asia to be one which is economically conjoined, and also one that is based on common and differentiated approach in the region. In this context, what about the institutional and the political systems within countries? Because often within many countries of South Asia, it becomes a major flashpoint when the debate comes about the nature of the relationship with India. We have seen it in Bangladesh, we've seen it in Maldives, we see it in many other parts. So how does that impact the whole quest for enduring peace within South Asia? And the second is, South Asia is not insulated from the world. When we talk about the globe, India and China is important. When we talk of South Asia, China is important. With China's relationship with every significant South Asian country becoming more and more important, is it a need to have China within South Asia to bring a more peaceful South Asia? Or do we need to keep China out and let them work the way they are to undermining sometimes quest for peace in South Asia?
Institutional arrangements within countries to enable closer relations and better understanding between and among our countries, in particular between the smaller neighbors and India. Well, in this regard, let me say that the good thing is that in the recent years, all the countries have supposedly become democracies. I say supposedly because in actual fact, what we have in many of our countries is electoral democracy. And with trappings of democracy and not the essential practice of the principles and values of democracy. And therein lies the greatest weakness of these countries, in particular, the problem of promoting good governance in the countries. What our peoples are deprived from or of in most of our countries is good governance because of the lack of the prevalence of true democracy in our countries. And that leads to all kinds of fears and suspicions and doubts. Failures of democracy, failures of good governance leads to insecurities, both among the people as well as among the leaders. And consequently, this impacts on our bilateral relations, which is fraught with, as I said, doubts and suspicions. But the good thing is that with the appearance of our Prime Minister Modi on the South Asian and indeed the world stage, I think the situation is changing. In fact, it has changed. There is truly a breeze of optimism that has swept across the entire region. Prime Minister Modi's promise of giving greater importance to good neighborly relations, I think, has heartened and delighted most people and given a sense of security to the people. His visit to Bhutan, his visit to Nepal have endeared Prime Minister Modi to the Bhutanese people. He is, as I was saying a little earlier, such a charismatic person. And his charisma, I think, is founded in sincerity, honesty, and compassion. And this comes out very powerfully. And I think we will see an improvement of bilateral relations in South Asia. Is China within or outside South Asia? Well, geographically, as I said earlier, South Asia is very well defined by the Hindu Kush Himalayan ranges and the Indian Ocean. Whatever one might say, the Himalayas and the Hindu Kush Mountains provide a formidable barrier between China and the rest of South Asia. Right now, we are struggling with the challenge of creating and promoting cooperation and collaboration within this region. I think our priority should be to get on among ourselves first and then work on relating with the other countries, China included.
The Honorable Ambassador from Sri Lanka pointed out that in 5th century BC in Greater India, there was prevalence of democracy. My submission is that it was a dharma-centered, dharma-oriented political organization. So should we not call it as dharmocracy rather than democracy?
I share views about Prime Minister Modi. I think he's today the most popular South Asian. If you take a vote of all of South Asia, he will come even in my country far ahead of even our own leaders. He's that popular. Of course, we all of us expect him to deliver the goods. And among them that I mentioned is that India's leadership in our region is important for region to stabilize and to prosper. We in Sri Lanka know very well that our rate of growth at this point is very high. We grew at 7.8%. Next year, we are going to grow by 8.2%. But we are also fully conscious if India picks up 3 more percentage points, we pick up 2 more as well. India leads. If India tanks for some unfortunate reason, which I don't see it will happen, we will also tank. That's how interconnected we are. Our economies, whether we like it or not, are very interconnected. Except perhaps Pakistan and India to that extent. Others are interconnected. So leadership of India is key. And for our region to succeed, the question to answer is succeed, we need to have peace and stability. Stability is the key. Stability requires security. Now, security for individuals, the community, for the countries, everyone requires that. Now, how do you get there? We are not living in isolation. We have major powers in our region. If you take Indian Ocean, 70% of world oil cargo goes through just by Sri Lanka. And our Colombo port, 70% of Colombo port business is Indian transshipment. It's a mega port, deep sea port. Today, we need more than ever security system that will ensure our security. Now, how can we do that? We cannot do that in isolation among us. We need, that's why even China must be involved. China should be, we cannot exclude any country. Including the region of Tibet, we can't exclude. We need to have a discourse as to how to create a security architecture in South Asian region, both in land and sea, that will, if we can replicate Europeans, they fought 2 world wars. Region was devastated, but ultimately they create a security architecture through what is called North Atlantic Treaty Organization, including those who are involved in that US, which is far away country, and that gave them stability, and they took off. South Asia to take off, we need the security architecture. And who can lead that? India.
South Asia and role of China, I think one should understand the Tibetan narrative, what happened to Tibet, which I always say is very important, because when Chinese first came to Tibet, They promised us development. They built roads. They then brought Chinese army, and then they started extracting our natural resources. And Tibet is under occupation since. And we were also promised one country, two system. Actually, 17-point agreement. The document was drafted in 1951 between the Chinese government, although it was under duress, it was forced on Tibetans in 1951, which promises one country, two system. But 9 years of practice from 1951 to 59 was regression every year. So as you can see, what is unfolding in Hong Kong is similar to that. Basic law was promised to Hong Kong. There's a regression now. So, of course, one should look at China and have relationship with China, which is important, but one should be also be fully aware of the Tibet experience and Tibet narrative. Because China's, I think, their goal is not simply Southeast Asia or South Asia or East Asia. I think their goal is to be global power, to be the superpower in the whole world. And then, in that sense, Tibet narrative is important. Other point I want to make about democracy is, yes, we talk a lot about East and West. As far as Tibetans are concerned, we follow a partyless democracy, which is very much an Indian kind of a Buddhist kind of practice. There's no party. When I ran for election in 2011, I was the youngest, the least experienced, never worked in Dharamsala. I spent 16 years in America, especially Harvard Law School. But Tibetans all over the world voted and elected me, even though I was the untested candidate, mainly because it was a partyless democracy. When there's a party-based democracy, what happens is all one party does in the opposition is to pull down the other party, and the one in the ruling party does is negate or dilute the other party. Hence, party interests prevail over the national interest. For example, when we ran for election, how the election happened was between me and the other candidate, the final runners-up. We used to share taxi together. We used to share same room together in the hotel. And we used to have debates. After the debate, we used to give each other campaign tips. And then we part our ways. Whenever we met, after the election, during the election, before the election, we were friends. We are still friends because we are fighting for a cause. So hence, partyless democracy is something to consider. And then in the forthcoming election in South Asia, I would like to see both the opposition ruling party sharing their bus together, sharing their hotel rooms together, holding events together. So party will have, people will have less burden to choose from. Thank you.
I think this stage is like Othello without Hamlet. Without reference to Pakistan, I think this discussion and presentation may not be complete. Ambassador Prasad spoke about inclusiveness in the region. Our neighbor has reduced its minority population from 19% to 1.5. Another neighbor reduced it from 30% to 6% and still going down. And there is a constant friction across the border.
What I tried to articulate was a kind of more aspirational direction, how we should go. Although I did not mention Pakistan, Pakistan is always back in our mind, and also China, because China has an influence in our region. But focus is, if you perhaps noticed, that we could get back to our old values, which could be the mobilizing force towards more inclusive, more integrated system. And Prime Minister Modi's comment about let's few of us, if we can't get all, let's few of us go forward with an idea, with a plan, and then others can join. So that's a model that perhaps we can embrace. Pakistan will join in at some point, because so we can hope for that. We cannot wish Pakistan away because they are part of our region. So that's the idea, that it's a more aspirational project for enduring peace. We cannot exclude any situation. And we fully recognize that we have to work on difficult issues. And we require a plan for that. And I think Prime Minister Modi seems to be leading that. Thank you.
I was confused about your comment on NATO. I was thinking when you talk about regional security, you were talking about the European Union, a political agreement to manage the conflict, and you are talking about the military regional system. Can you clarify that? When you talk about regional security, are you talking a political system to manage conflict, Or are you talking about the military model to put together armies? And the second question is, what are the obstacles for the regional solution? 3 obstacles for the regional solution. Thank you.
Look, in any region, if you consider Europe a region, despite what Prasad may have said, NATO is not the answer. NATO is part of the problem in Ukraine. So military alliances often create more problems than they solve. One of the reasons I kept this was because it's really for the guests to speak, but I thought in the end, since we are going to learn from this and carry forward certain ideas from this conclave, may I say that Mr. Thinley's presentation was inspiring. And taking off from that, may I add the following. He spoke of an economic union. There is a proposal, SAARC had agreed to move towards an economic union by 2020. We are nowhere near getting there. But the important point is that we almost are moving in that direction, which are 3 or 4 eastern neighbors. That is with Bhutan, with Nepal, even with Bangladesh, and certainly with Sri Lanka. So I think Mr. Modi's prescription at let's move at a pace which everybody is comfortable with is the answer. You are not going to get a South Asian Economic Union because Pakistan does not want it. Because in a South Asian Economic Union, unfortunately, the predominant player would be India because it is the largest economy and we can't cut our size to please others. The reality, therefore, is that we will move at a 2-track way. And it is happening. From the Kathmandu summit, it should be evident that Nepal, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh are moving at a different pace. Afghanistan would like to move at that pace, but does not have contiguity. So what we can look towards is an Eastern Economic Union linked to Southeast Asia. All the members of this Eastern Economic Union are members of BIMSTEC, which links us to ASEAN and Myanmar. So we have to look, for India, South Asia is not the end of the world. We have to look larger eastwards, with our Eastern Union being a part of our linkage with the larger question of Asia and Asian security. I think this is the one. Second is, we don't want even this small progress to be halted by bilateral issues. China, as was pointed out by Mr. Sanghe, is not within the geographical portion of South Asia. China has tried desperately to exclude India from forums in Southeast Asia and failed. And finally, going back to what he said, I think we have no desire to take benefit from anything happening in Tibet. If the Chinese and Tibetans decide to settle according to the 17-point agreement which the two of them signed, as far as I'm concerned, it's fine. I don't speak for the government of India. Happily, I'm not in service and I can say that. You know, one thing we have to bear in mind, energy, tourism, and trade. The Eastern setup I spoke of is working. When Pakistan chooses to join in, Afghanistan automatically will. And that's what we should all work for, this larger economic union to our east. Finally, you know, I do feel sad that one of the things which united us across Asia was from the Indic religions, the spread of Buddhism. Today, there are 1.5 million practicing Buddhists across the world. That is likely to go up if you count all the Chinese who really are Buddhist believers. You didn't have many Russians worshipping the Orthodox Church before the end of communism. The number of Buddhists is going to go up to about 2 billion in the world. India should not be in the business of competing selfishly in economic investments and exploitation of other people's natural resources. I think what we need to build is a civilizational link with all countries which respect this Buddhist path. Unfortunately, too close to us, We saw what happened to Buddhist heritage in Bamiyan. And we do not wish that to spread across the region. That is our greatest concern. Individual countries we can deal with, but with the spread of the mentality of people which led to the destruction of the Bamiyan Buddha is something which just this region will not accept. And I'd like to conclude by saying that we would like to build an inclusive architecture, and I hope Dr. Ram Madhav carries this forward later on as emerging from this conclave, of a very close spiritual union linking India with the rest of the Buddhist world, because ultimately I remember what a Myanmar foreign minister said to me when I said, you know, your Chinese influence is increasing in your country. He said, you know, China may sell us weapons, but I have to come for salvation to Bodh Gaya. Now, I think unless the government of India, with support from all the state governments, develops our country as a Buddhist heritage spot, which the participation of all Buddhist countries, including China if they wish to come, into making India the center for Buddhist spiritualism and spiritualism in this part of the world, we would be failing in our duty to our ancestors. Thank you.